Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
So we know that inflation is here. And while you might not be up on the current inflation numbers, you've most likely felt it at the gas pump or the grocery store or other places that you're used to tracking prices, or at least that you notice prices. Well, keep in mind, if you're feeling it, so are your team members. And that's what we're going to talk about on this week's episode of Dental Business RX, specifically inflation. It's here. What now? I'm your host, Jeff Bloomberg, and I want to focus this episode not on decrying the subject of inflation, but I want to put more of a focus on what should you be doing as a dentist in private practice to ensure that your practice stays out in front of this and continues to be competitive in this market. So with that said, let's take a look at some of the basic numbers. And I don't want to go too crazy with these because they can tend to get a bit lunky on a podcast. But what are the current inflation numbers? Well, as of right now, September 2021's report, the official government numbers show inflation at 5.39% year over year. So that may not seem like that big of a deal. That is high. I know that year in, year out, I'd always be thinking with, a 3% inflation number. That seems to be what the usual has been for the last 15 or 20 years. But it's 5.39%. And obviously, certain areas are inflating higher than others. Energy costs are up to close to 25%. That's gas and heating oil and things like this. Food costs are up a little less than 5%. And overall inflation, as we said, is over 5%. And it may not seem, again, like a big deal, but when you start extrapolating these numbers a bit, you can see how it is a little bit of a bigger deal. Let's just take the basics. So if you had $1 in September of last year, what you could buy with that dollar now costs you $1.05. Actually, a little bit more, $5.4. And that also means that dollar you had last year, if you still have that dollar, only buys you what 95 cents would have bought you a year ago. All right. It's a bit of a disconnect, a bit confusing, but think with that for a second. So what you could buy for 95 cents now costs you $1. Now, again, 5 cents, who cares? But when you start to extrapolate these numbers, let's say you had $100,000 in the bank last year and you kept that $100,000 in the bank making 0.0000 whatever interest you might be making. It's not invested. It's just sitting in your bank account. Well, that $100,000 last year just lost $5,000 in purchasing power. That $100,000 from last year is only worth $95,000 this year. To buy what you bought for $100,000 last year, you need $105,000. So one thing I want you to keep in mind is, yes, we're all feeling inflation, whether you've had it in the official numbers, you've seen the official numbers, you're feeling it when you're buying things. I know that I see prices going up here or there. But if you're feeling it, so is your team. So are the members of your team. It's costing them more to get to work, to pay for gas, to pay their electric bill. Food is costing them more, etc. So where this starts to become a problem, like why is this becoming a problem, is if it continues, it could become a real problem. But why this becomes a problem is dental offices work in an ideal state where you have a certain percentage for each category of your overhead. All right. In other words, you don't want your rent to exceed a certain percent of your revenues. You don't want your payroll to exceed a certain percent of your revenues. And for that matter, on the episode webpage, we have a little link if you want to look at overhead guidelines by category for a solo practitioner. We have it there so you can kind of see how you measure up. So where you might be seeing this right now, the inflation in your office, because, obviously rent's going to be locked in. You might have an increase year over year. But the areas you're going to be seeing it right now are going to be in energy costs, possibly supply costs, your health insurance or insurances. Your marketing is going to be costing you more. And right now, especially, your staff costs are going up. And I want to talk about that a little bit as to why. But I want you to think with a number. Your staff costs, less any associates or you as the owner, your staff costs should not exceed, including payroll taxes, 22.5% of your revenues. So if you're grossing $100,000 a month, you should not be paying more than $22,500, including payroll taxes, for your team. That includes your office manager, hygienist, does not include the associates or the owner doctor. So why are staff costs going up? And you probably have already thought with this to a degree. Well, number one, it's costing potential staff, maybe even some of your existing staff. It is costing them more, but this may be affecting your existing staff. It's costing them more to live. Their costs are going up. Gas, rent, or maybe not rent, but gas and food, etc. But then also, on top of that, we have a bit of a labor shortage. And this gets interesting. We've known about this. Jobs have been harder to fill than they have been for a while. I talked about that a few episodes ago, with what's going on with the labor market. But let's take a look at some basic labor statistics. Like, is this movie continuing? And yes, it is. So here's a couple basic stats I want to give you. First, number of job openings right now. So I talked about this as far as number of job openings again a few episodes ago. But to give you an idea, there was the number of job openings, in other words, people looking to hire, jobs available, did go down from July to August. And mind you, some of these, I'm recording this podcast in October of 2021. There is a lag on some of these statistics, especially national statistics. So they went down from 11 million job openings to 10.4 million job openings, which sounds good, right? It went down by 600,000 job openings. Till you look at where we're coming from. If you go back to January, there were only 8 million job openings. And when I did a presentation in May of this past year, there were a little bit more than that. So yeah, it's gotten a little better, so the pain factor went from 5 to 10 and now it's down to 9. But how is this affecting small businesses? Because this is just total job openings. Well, you may or may not have heard of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the NFIB. They have various reports that people look to. They're surveys. And there's a couple of interesting stats here. One of them is, can small businesses hire enough workers? These are surveys, right? And as of the September survey, the percentage of businesses with at least one unfilled opening is still highest ever. It's over 50%. So half of small businesses right now have at least one position that they are trying to fill. And the number of workers per firm in some of these small businesses have gone, in other words, the change in the number of workers. Are they adding workers or are they losing workers? The last 2 months, they've actually been at a negative. They've been below zero. In other words, they are down workers from where they were prior. All right, so you have less workers available, more job openings. So you basically have a lack of supply, a lack of labor supply. So if you look at what causes inflation in the first place, especially with wages, there would be the overall loss of purchasing power of our currency unit, the US dollar, or whatever currency, if you're listening outside the United States, that you use, that currency buys less than it used to buy. But also availability has a lot to do with it too. If someone really wants something, they're usually willing to pay more. So we have a lot of people competing for employees right now. And I've seen this. Matter of fact, someone I know, someone I work with, wife, paralegal, was working at a firm. She loved her job, but she started to have problems with some of the people there. So what'd she do? She quit and got another job and is getting paid more money. Easy peasy, right? So that's sort of the environment that we're in right now. So costs are going up. General costs, marketing, insurances, and whatnot, and other costs like that, but also just costs for labor. I mean, I'm right in the middle right now of delivering our financial planning and profitability seminar. And, I like to survey our clients while they're there. I just wanted to find out, what are hygienists getting right now? Well, one person is paying $52 an hour. Another person's paying $46. You may be listening to this and go, wow, I'm paying more. Well, that wasn't what people were getting paid 2 years ago. So with all this going on, your costs are going up in all goods, and your costs with labor are artificially, in my opinion, I think they'll eventually normalize out, are a little bit higher than you would expect. What should you be doing? Well, I mentioned earlier that dental offices work when the percentage, there's each category of overhead fits below a certain percentage. Like I mentioned, payroll, 22.5%. If you're spending 24, 25, 26% on payroll, that's when you start to see problems, right? So you have to be able to raise your revenue without raising your cost. Okay, I'll say that again. You have to raise your revenue without raising your costs. And the only way to do that is to increase your fees. Now, Maybe you've done that already. Maybe every year you increase your fees. Normally, I would recommend for our clients every year, do a fee increase you should start doing it in November so you could launch it in January. Some people did, some people didn't, but before it wasn't that big of a deal before. So I talked to somebody that hadn't done it, and I'm like, well, you really should. But if they hadn't, it wasn't the end of the world, or maybe they forgot for a couple years so they could do it incrementally afterwards. But you're not in that environment anymore. You need to raise your fees now. If you talk to Sabri, who you might have heard our Deputy Chief Operating Officer on a couple of our prior episodes, Sabri is telling people, you need to raise your fees by 10% right now. Now, some people find this a bit overwhelming, in which case, we kind of make it a little easier, do it incrementally, go 3% 1 month, and maybe a couple months later, another 3 and another 3. But if you keep seeing increases as time goes on, that may not be enough either. But you have to do what's real to you. You have to do it in a way that's easy and simple for you. But if it were me, I would be raising my fees right now. I would absolutely be raising my fees. And it was funny because, I'm going over this in this financial planning and profitability seminar yesterday. Look, you need to start raising your fees. And, most people were fine with it. But then the other issue came up. What if you're a provider? What if you're a participating provider in an insurance plan? Well, here's where it gets really cool. Well, while all this is going on, staff costs are going up, inflation is going up, things are costing more, supply chain disruptions, et cetera. What are some of the insurance companies doing? Well, they're lowering your reimbursement. Heard this now several times. I won't name any names as far as the insurance companies go, but it's more than one. So these insurance companies, if you're a participating provider, you agree to accept their fee schedule. Maybe you were getting $800 for a crown before. Now they want to give you less. So here's what's going to happen. If you don't increase the amount of revenue you're making, because the environment right now is inflationary, your costs are going to go up. If you don't do something, you are going to lose your competitive edge. You're not going to be able to continue to compete. And maybe that will prevent you from getting new staff. But eventually, if you want my prediction, that will affect the staff that you have. If you have somebody working for you who's a dental assistant, you're paying them $22 an hour, but the going rate starts to become 24 or 26, nothing on them. They'd be stupid to not look at a better life, even if they love their job, a better life for themselves and their family. So you have to be able to stay competitive. So if you don't start bringing those fees up, maybe it won't happen now, but that will eventually happen down the road. So obviously a fee increase in your normal fees are fine, but what do we do with the insurance patients? What do we do with the patient who we're getting an $800 for a crown for when our crown fee is normally $1,400? Well, a couple things to think with. Number one, if I'm getting $800 or maybe less now, depending on the insurance company, for a crown, my lab fee isn't giving me a discount. My employees, my assistant who's helping me prep the crown isn't giving me a discount. My scheduler who scheduled the patient isn't giving me a discount because this is a PPO patient. From a business model perspective, PPOs just do not work in the long run. And this has been something, I saw this happen in medicine. I saw this happen to alternative medicine like chiropractic. I've seen it happen in optometry, podiatry. And now it's coming for dentists where, back in the 80s and 90s, you could get all the reimbursement you want and it was easy, right? Then the HMOs and PPOs started to get heavier inroads. And now you go get an MRI and the place charges $2,500 for an MRI, but the negotiated rate from the insurance company is $500. That's the route they went. That's not the route you want to go. All right. That isn't the route you want to go. It doesn't work from a costing perspective because it gets to the point where you go why am I doing this? The other thing I would think with is this is, and I would ask you this question, and I've surveyed our clients before, and I know the answer, but I'll ask you. If you participate in a number of insurance plans, let's take one of the bigger ones that you participate with in your practice. So let's say you participate with this plan and you decide you're going to drop this plan. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. What percentage of those patients do you think are going to leave? If you're like the average doctor, you probably said 50%, 70%, 80%. It's absolutely not true. The average is about 30%. So let's do some basic math. If your crown fee is $1,400 and the crown fee in your plan is $800 and you have 3 patients who need a crown. Here are 3 patients. They all want to get their crowns done and they have individual crowns and your plan, and they're all in the plan. So the plan will pay you 800 patients. So 800 times 3 is $2,400. Let's say you drop that plan. Now remember, there's about a 30% drop off. One of those patients, which is more than 30%, it's really 33%, decides, you know what, doctor, I'm leaving. So you're left with 2 patients that you're now doing at full fee. That's $1,400 each, or $2,800. So I've seen 2 patients for $2,800, or I've seen 3 patients for $2,400. I mean, obviously the patients need the treatment, and that is something that is beside the point here. But from a practice and business perspective, let's take a look at what just happened. I just lowered my material costs. If you're taking impressions, maybe you're scanning, or you may be using impression material still. I'm not using impression material on 3 patients. I'm using it on 2. I'm not paying an assistant for that procedure. I've lowered my labor costs, and I have no lab fee. I've lowered my costs to make more money. Right? So you go, well, why don't people get out of these plans? They're scared. And I've talked about this on some of the other episodes. It's not difficult to get out. We have clients who are doing it every single day so that they're not in this situation. And the problem is, if you have a large amount of insurance infiltration in your practice, as inflation continues to ramp up, especially if these insurance companies don't start playing ball, you're going to start to have some really hard decisions to make, which I would prefer that you didn't. So the upshot of all this, I think inflation's here. Like, look, I'm not a psychic. I don't even know if the psychic be able to predict it. I don't know how long it's here to stay, but it is definitely here now. We do have a competitive labor market. You want to stay out in front of this. You want to remain competitive. Your fees need to go up, and you need to do it in a way that's, comfortable for you. And you can't have a situation where if 60% of your practice is PPO, you can't have a situation where you can't raise fees on 60% of your patients. Because for that matter, if you think about it like this, let's imagine for a second that the average write-off for a PPO patient, just global average write-off, is about 30%. So something that would normally cost a fee-for-service patient $100 costs $70 in the plan. I think that's pretty comfortable. It's usually worse, right? Let's say that's the average. Well, if a third of my practice becomes PPO, a third of my patient volume becomes PPO, and it's a 30% write-off, I have just lowered my fees overall by 10%. 1/3 of 30. If 2/3 of my practice becomes PPO, I've lowered my fees by 20%, and obviously 100% of my practice became PPO, I've lowered my fees by 30%. So getting rid of plans actually is a fee increase to a degree. It is a fee increase. And if you're wondering what should my fees be, how much should I be charging, I recommend, there's obviously a number of different places you can go. I'm a bit old school. I like the Wasserman Guide. We'll put the link. I have no connection with them. I've just always used it. It gives you the, percentiles by zip code, by CDT code. So, this code at the 40th percentile, 50th percentile, 60th percentile, what the charge is in your zip. And it can give you a general idea of what you should be charging, or, what the other people in your area are charging. If you're at the 50th percentile, that means that 50% of people are charging less and 50% are charging more. I'll put the link to the Wasserman Guide on the episode webpage. You can download it. Maybe you can, or not download it, but you can check it out for yourself. There may be some other service you use for this. So to keep it simple, as far as action items, I would make sure my fees are in line with, I like the 60th percentile or higher range, but that's up to you. Make sure my full fees are good. Raise my fees, right? I would do that. And then the last thing is, if you're in plans, you need to get out, especially the really bad ones. If you want help with any of this, we are more than happy to help you with it here at MGE. You can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. You can find us, obviously, on the web at mgeonline.com, or you can call us at 800-640-1140. Guys, I wish you the best, and, this is a time, in this economic environment, you have to pay attention. This isn't, smooth waters. They're a little choppy, but that doesn't mean you can't reach your final destination, okay? Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.